This video details how I made the electric motor in the 2008 electric Corvette conversion. I used a Tesla Model S Sport motor, which is a three-phase induction motor. It's rated at 503 horsepower or 370 kilowatts, which is 15% over the Corvette LS3 6.2 liter that the electric motor replaced. The torque is 469 pound-feet, and that's about 16% over the Corvette LS3 engine. The electric motor is directly coupled with a 3.12 gear reduction, which came out of the Tesla middle gear set, to the Corvette 342 rear differential, for a total to the wheels ratio of 10.7 to 1 versus the Tesla 9.7 to 1. This slide is a pictorial cutaway of the rolling chassis for a Corvette. The four boxes in yellow are the battery boxes, and the red box in the rear is the box for all the controls. I will cover these two areas in subsequent videos. For today's video, focus on the blue electric motor that is mounted directly to the rear differential of the Corvette. I bought the Tesla Model S drive unit off eBay, and the whole unit came from a dismantler in California and shipped here to my place. And as you see there on the pallet is the complete assembly, and I'll show you the individual components and how I converted it as I go through the rest of the video. This shows the motor section of the Tesla Model S drive unit sitting on the pallet before I disassembled it. This is a picture of the electric motor side of the Tesla Model S drive unit. On the lower left of the picture, you can see the drive gear coming out of the motor, driving the intermediate gear of the drive unit. What's missing is the final drive and the rear differential of the Tesla motor. You'll see that I cut that section out of the casting in a later picture. This is a picture of the other side of the Tesla Model S drive unit where the controller is mounted, and you'll see in a subsequent video how I use that controller section. On the left is the bearing that the drive shaft coming out of the electric motor engages, and in the middle is also a bearing that the intermediate shaft coming out of the Tesla drive unit engages. I will be using the left bearing, as you'll see in a subsequent slide of this presentation. And you'll see where I do cut this casting away and remove the final drive section of the casing. This picture is of the rear casing of the Tremec 6-speed manual transmission on a Corvette. And this casing is used as an adapter casing to go from the transmission to the rear differential of the Corvette. And essentially I'm using it as the same function where I'm transitioning through an adapter plate attached to the electric motor and then through this adapter casing to mount the electric motor directly to the rear differential of the Corvette. This is a transmission drive shaft that goes through the Tremec 6-speed manual transmission, and I use that to transition from the electric motor to the rear differential of the Corvette. I cut it to length to fit, and you'll see how it's assembled in a subsequent slide. This is the middle gear assembly in the Tesla Model S gearbox. And what I do is separate the smaller drive gear, which is attached through a spline fitting, from the larger intermediate gear. This picture shows the underside of the middle or intermediate drive gears in the Tesla Model S unit. And you'll see that I use this large bearing in the drive gear for the electric motor in the Corvette assembly. So in this picture you can see the bearing on the left, the intermediate drive gear, and then the piece that I do not use. This drive gear was attached to the intermediate gear and drives the final drive gear in the Tesla. And of course I do not need that because I'll be driving a shaft into the rear differential of the Corvette. This shows the drive shaft that goes through the Tremec 6-speed manual as it would go inside the intermediate gear of the Tesla drive unit. So the Tremec shaft is splined and the inside of the gear is splined, so I need to come up with a coupler to connect the two. And that's a key enabler to make this work. That coupler's got to be able to handle a large amount of torque between the electric motor and the rear wheels of the Corvette. That drive shaft actually does get cut off and machined down to allow for the large bearing to fit onto the shaft. This view shows the cut-off drive shaft going through the Tremec 6-speed and is inserted into the large intermediate bearing with a spacer to give an appropriate spacing between that and the gear. This is a picture of the Tremec 6-speed manual drive shaft that I'm using cut off and inserted into the intermediate bearing that was used in the Tesla drive unit. On the left is a spacer that goes on the shaft, and then the middle item is a key coupler that I had made. It was a very unique design specifically made for this application, where the inner spline matches up with the Tremec 6-speed drive shaft and the outer spline matches up with the intermediate gear of the Tesla drive unit. That coupler is the key enabler to make this whole motor and drive unit work. This is a picture of the completed assembly with the bearing at the bottom, a spacer between the bearing and that large drive gear, and then an additional spacer. And again, the key enabler is a coupler that's between that large drive gear and the splines of the Tremec 6-speed drive shaft. This is a picture of the electric motor with the casing now cut to fit my application. You see the main drive shaft coming out of the electric motor with a small gear that drives the intermediate larger gear up from the Tesla Model S drive unit, and the assembly that is incorporated into the Tremec 6-speed drive shaft that is inserted into the rear differential of the Corvette. On the top side of the shaft coming out of the electric motor, there will be a bearing that you saw in the original picture of the controller half of the drive assembly. I will use that bearing and it will be mounted to a aluminum adapter plate that mounts between the motor and the Tremec casing that I'm using as an adapter between the motor and the rear differential. This is the assembly showing the electric motor, a 1-inch aluminum adapter plate, the casing from the rear part of the Tremec 6-speed manual that is connected to the rear differential of the Corvette. And you can see the drive shaft that is sticking out of the rear assembly that goes into the rear differential of the Corvette. The adapter plate still needs to be cut to size, and the holes need to be drilled and tapped on both the motor side and the adapter casing side of the assembly. This is the completed motor assembly ready for installation into the Corvette. This picture shows the completed motor assembly mounted temporarily to the rear differential of the Corvette. This is the completed assembly with the motor attached to the rear differential and bolted in place attached to the rear section of the Corvette.